I was standing in the marble foyer of our family estate, dripping wet from the unexpected thunderstorm that had caught me walking back from the stables, when I heard my father's booming voice echo from the formal dining room. To celebrate Victoria's engagement to Marcus, your mother and I have decided to give you both Sinclair Industries as our wedding gift. The champagne cork popped at exactly the moment my heart stopped beating. Through the ornate doorway, I could see my sister Victoria, radiant in her cream silk dress, diamond engagement ring catching the light from the crystal chandelier, embracing our parents, while her fiancé Marcus beamed with the satisfaction of a man whose plan had just succeeded beyond his wildest dreams. The company that had been built by 3 generations of Sinclair women, the empire that represented everything our family had worked to create, was being handed over like a trinket to celebrate an engagement that had been announced just 6 weeks ago. "Luna!" my mother called, noticing me in the doorway. "Come celebrate with us. Your sister has wonderful news." I walked into the dining room, my riding boots squelching against the Persian rug, acutely aware that I looked like a drowned rat, while Victoria looked like she belonged on the cover of Vogue. This had been the dynamic our entire lives. Victoria, the golden daughter with her perfect grades and perfect boyfriends and perfect life plan, while I was the family disappointment who preferred horses to social events and business strategy to debutante balls. "Congratulations," I said quietly, accepting the champagne flute my father pressed into my hand. "When did you decide to get married?" "Marcus proposed last night," Victoria gushed, extending her hand so I could admire the 5-carat emerald-cut diamond that probably cost more than most people's cars. "We're thinking a spring wedding, something elegant but not too ostentatious." Marcus stepped forward, his smile warm and genuine as he shook my hand. "Luna, I've heard so much about you. Victoria tells me you've been instrumental in the company's strategic planning over the past few years." Instrumental. That was one way to put it. What Victoria had apparently told her fiancé was that I had been helping with some business analysis. What she hadn't mentioned was that I had been single-handedly running the strategic development division, that my operational improvements had increased company profits by 340% over the past 3 years, or that every major business decision Sinclair Industries had made since I graduated from Wharton had originated from my detailed analysis and recommendations. "I enjoy contributing where I can," I replied diplomatically, watching as my parents fawned over Marcus with the kind of enthusiasm they had never shown for any of my accomplishments. "The timing couldn't be more perfect," my father continued, refilling his champagne glass. "Marcus has some innovative ideas about expanding Sinclair Industries into international markets. With his background in global finance and Victoria's natural leadership abilities, they'll take the company to heights we never imagined." Natural leadership abilities. Victoria, whose primary qualifications for running a multi-billion-dollar corporation were a liberal arts degree from Vassar and an impressive ability to coordinate charity luncheons. "Actually," I said carefully, "there might be some complications with transferring ownership of Sinclair Industries." The room fell silent. My parents exchanged glances, and Victoria's smile faltered slightly. "What kind of complications?" Marcus asked, his tone still pleasant, but with an edge of concern. I looked around the dining room at the family portraits lining the walls. 3 generations of Sinclair women who had built our fortune through steel, determination, and strategic thinking. My great-grandmother Eleanor, who had started the company with a single textile mill. My grandmother Catherine, who had expanded into manufacturing and real estate. My mother Patricia, who had diversified into technology and sustainable energy. And now they wanted to hand it all over to Victoria and her financier fiancé, as if the past 90 years of female entrepreneurship could be packaged up with a bow and given away as a wedding present. "The complication," I said slowly, "is that I own 62% of Sinclair Industries." The champagne glass slipped from Victoria's hand, shattering against the marble floor in a sound that seemed to echo through the sudden, deafening silence. "That's impossible," my father said finally, his voice tight with disbelief. "Luna, I don't know what you think you understand about the company structure, but I understand that Grandmother Catherine left me controlling interest in Sinclair Industries when she died," I interrupted, pulling out my phone and opening the email I had been dreading to share. "I understand that you've been managing those shares as trustee until my 30th birthday. And I understand that as of last Tuesday, my 30th birthday, which apparently everyone forgot, those shares transferred to my direct ownership." I held up the phone, showing the official notification from our family's law firm confirming the trust transfer. "So, while I appreciate the generous sentiment behind your engagement gift," I continued, looking directly at Victoria and Marcus, "you can't actually give away something that belongs to me." Victoria's face had gone completely white. Marcus looked like a man who had just watched his carefully constructed plans crumble before his eyes. My parents appeared to be in shock, staring at me as if I had just announced I was an alien from another planet. "Luna," my mother said carefully, "surely we can discuss this privately, as a family." "We are discussing it as a family," I replied. "In fact, I think it's time we had several family discussions that are long overdue." I set down my champagne glass and walked toward the door, then paused and turned back to the room full of people who had just learned that the family disappointment was actually the family CEO. "Victoria, congratulations again on your engagement. Marcus, it was lovely to meet you. Mom, Dad, we'll need to schedule a board meeting soon to discuss the transition of leadership responsibilities." I left them sitting in stunned silence, surrounded by the shattered glass and broken assumptions that had defined our family dynamic for 30 years. Tomorrow, they would all learn what it felt like when the overlooked daughter finally stepped into her power. The memory hit me as I stood in my childhood bedroom, still dripping from the storm, staring at the corporate documents scattered across my desk. Victoria, at 8 years old, standing in this same room, hands on her hips with that imperious expression she'd perfected even then, declaring that she would inherit everything because she was the good daughter. I had been 6, clutching my stuffed horse and trying not to cry after our parents had missed my first-place finish at the regional equestrian competition because Victoria had a piano recital the same evening. "Mama says I'm going to run the company someday," Victoria had announced with the confidence of a child who had never been told she wasn't good enough, "because I'm smart and pretty, and I know how to talk to people." Even at 6, I had understood that Victoria was everything our parents wanted in a daughter, while I was everything they had to tolerate. The pattern had been established early and reinforced consistently throughout our childhood. Victoria excelled at the things our parents valued: social graces, academic performance in traditional subjects, the ability to charm adults at dinner parties. I excelled at things they didn't understand or appreciate: analytical thinking, mathematical modeling, understanding complex systems, and finding ways to optimize them. "Luna is so intense," I had overheard my mother telling her friend Mrs. Whitman when I was 12. "She spends hours studying our quarterly reports like they're bedtime stories. It's not natural for a girl her age. Not natural." As if wanting to understand the business that bore our family name was somehow aberrant behavior for a Sinclair daughter. Victoria, meanwhile, had been the perfect debutante, the ideal prep school student, the daughter who could be counted on to say the right thing at charity functions and smile appropriately in family photographs. She had been accepted to Vassar with a recommendation letter from our father's golf partner, while I had earned a full academic scholarship to Wharton with a portfolio of business analysis projects that had impressed even the admissions committee. "We're so proud of both our daughters," my father would say at social events, but his voice carried different weight when he talked about Victoria's liberal arts honors versus my business degree. Victoria's achievements were celebrated with dinner parties and announcements in the social pages. My achievements were acknowledged with polite nods and quick changes of subject. The real turning point had come during my sophomore year at Wharton, when Sinclair Industries was struggling with declining profits and increased competition from overseas manufacturers. I had spent my winter break analyzing our operational inefficiencies and developing a comprehensive restructuring plan that included supply chain optimization, strategic partnerships, and diversification into emerging markets. I had presented my findings to my father in his study, laying out charts and projections that showed how implementing my recommendations could increase profits by 30% within 18 months. "This is very impressive work, Luna," he had said, scanning through my analysis with what might have been genuine respect. "Have you considered a career in consulting? You could work for one of the big firms after graduation. Work for someone else." After developing a plan that could save our family company, he was suggesting I go work for strangers. "I was hoping I could work for Sinclair Industries," I had said carefully. "Maybe start in the strategic planning department, work my way up." "Oh, sweetheart," my father had interrupted gently. "Victoria is going to take over the company eventually. It wouldn't be fair to give you false hopes about advancement opportunities that might not materialize." False hopes. Because Victoria was destined to inherit, and I was destined to be peripheral. But I had continued developing strategic plans for Sinclair Industries anyway, presenting them as academic projects, and watching as my father implemented my recommendations one by one, always crediting external consultants or management insights, rather than acknowledging that his supposedly impractical daughter had been the source of the company's turnaround. The memory of my grandmother's funeral 3 years ago flooded back with painful clarity. Catherine Sinclair had been the only person in our family who had truly understood my capabilities, who had listened to my ideas about business strategy and asked thoughtful questions instead of politely changing the subject. "You have the mind for this," Grandmother Catherine had told me during one of our last conversations, when she was already weak from the cancer that would take her months later. You see patterns and possibilities that others miss. Don't let them convince you that you're not capable of great things. I had thought she was just being encouraging, the way grandmothers are supposed to be. I had never imagined that she had been planning to ensure my capabilities would have the opportunity to flourish. The trust documents I had received from the law firm last week painted a picture of a woman who had been watching our family dynamics with far more clarity than any of us realized. Catherine Sinclair had seen her son favoring his older daughter for reasons that had nothing to do with business acumen. She had seen me developing into exactly the kind of strategic thinker Sinclair Industries needed for its future survival, and she had made a decision that none of us had seen coming. Luna has demonstrated exceptional analytical capabilities and genuine commitment to the long-term success of Sinclair Industries, her will had stated. It is my conviction that she represents the best hope for the company's continued growth and ethical leadership. Ethical leadership. I wondered if my grandmother had suspected that there were ethical issues brewing in our family's approach to business management. I wondered if she had foreseen exactly the kind of situation that was unfolding downstairs. A situation where Victoria's engagement to a man none of us really knew was being celebrated with the casual disposal of a multi-billion-dollar corporation. I changed out of my wet clothes and opened my laptop, pulling up the strategic analysis I had been preparing for Sinclair Industries' next phase of growth. Tomorrow would bring difficult conversations and family confrontations, but tonight I wanted to review exactly what I had inherited and what I planned to do with it. Victoria had always been the golden child, destined for effortless success and parental approval. But golden children don't always make good CEOs, and parents don't always understand what their children are truly capable of achieving. It was time for the family to learn what the overlooked daughter had been building while they were focused on the perfect one. I found my parents in my father's study at 7 the next morning, both looking like they hadn't slept, surrounded by legal documents and financial statements spread across his mahogany desk. My mother was still in her silk pajamas, her usually perfect hair disheveled, while my father sat in his leather chair wearing the expression of a man who had just discovered his entire understanding of reality was fundamentally flawed. "Luna," my mother said when I appeared in the doorway with my coffee and laptop, "we need to discuss this situation rationally." "Good," I replied, settling into the chair across from my father's desk. "I've been hoping we could have a rational discussion about Sinclair Industries for years." My father looked up from the documents he was reviewing, what appeared to be copies of Grandmother Catherine's will and trust agreements that he had apparently spent the night studying. "Luna, I want you to understand that we never intended to exclude you from the company's future. But these ownership arrangements, we had no idea Catherine had structured things this way. She never told you about the trust? She told us she was setting up educational trusts for both you and Victoria," my mother said, her voice tight with stress. "We assumed that meant college funds, maybe some additional money for graduate school or starting your careers. We had no idea she was transferring controlling interest in the entire company." I opened my laptop and pulled up the comprehensive analysis I had prepared the night before. "Would you like to see what I've been doing with my inheritance?" For the next hour, I walked my parents through the strategic plan I had developed for Sinclair Industries' next 5 years of growth. International expansion into emerging markets, vertical integration of our supply chain, development of sustainable manufacturing processes that would position us ahead of coming environmental regulations, and strategic acquisitions that would eliminate our 3 biggest competitors within 18 months. "This is comprehensive," my father admitted, studying the financial projections that showed potential revenue increases of 500% over 5 years. "Luna, how long have you been working on this?" 3 years, I said simply. "Ever since I realized that Victoria wasn't actually going to develop her own strategic vision for the company. Victoria has been focused on her social responsibilities," my mother said defensively. "Charity work, community engagement, building the relationships that are essential for business success, all of which are valuable," I agreed, "but none of which constitute a business strategy for competing in global markets against companies that are spending billions on innovation and optimization." I advanced to the next section of my presentation, showing the competitive analysis I had conducted of our primary rivals. Chen Industries has automated 60% of their manufacturing processes. Bergman Group has established manufacturing partnerships in 12 countries. Morrison Technologies has developed 3 breakthrough products that directly compete with our core offerings. While Victoria has been planning charity luncheons, our competitors have been planning our obsolescence. The silence in the room was profound as my parents absorbed the implications of what I was showing them. "What about Marcus?" my father asked finally. He has extensive experience in international finance. Surely a partnership between Victoria's leadership abilities and his financial expertise would be inadequate to address the challenges we're facing, I interrupted, pulling up the background research I had conducted on Marcus Hamilton. Marcus's international finance experience consists of 3 years at a mid-tier investment firm handling portfolio management for wealthy individuals. He has no experience in manufacturing, no expertise in supply chain management, and no understanding of the technological innovations that are reshaping our industry. I showed them Marcus's professional history, his academic background, and most tellingly, his financial situation. Marcus graduated from a decent but not exceptional MBA program, worked for firms that specialize in wealth management rather than corporate strategy, and according to his credit reports and financial disclosures, has approximately $340,000 in personal debt and no significant assets. How did you obtain his financial disclosures? My mother asked, her voice sharp with concern. The same way any major corporation conducts due diligence on potential business partners, I replied. Through legitimate background investigation services. My father was staring at the documents as if they contained evidence of an alien invasion. Luna, what are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that Marcus Hamilton approached Victoria with a very specific agenda. He identified her as the presumed heir to a billion-dollar corporation, initiated a romantic relationship designed to lead to marriage and business partnership, and has now positioned himself to gain control of Sinclair Industries through someone who lacks the expertise to recognize his limitations. I pulled up one final document, a corporate registration showing that Marcus had established Hamilton Strategic Consulting LLC just 2 weeks before asking Victoria to marry him. He's already planning to leverage his marriage into a consulting business that will essentially strip mine Sinclair Industries' resources and relationships for his personal benefit. My mother had gone completely pale. You're saying Victoria is being used. I'm saying Victoria is 28 years old, has never had a serious boyfriend, and was probably vulnerable to attention from a sophisticated older man who seemed to value her intelligence and social connections. I don't think she understands what she's agreeing to any more than you understood what Grandmother Catherine was planning. My father stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the grounds where 3 generations of Sinclair women had built their legacies. What do you want, Luna? I want to run the company I inherited, I said simply. I want to implement the strategic plans I've developed. I want to ensure that Sinclair Industries remains competitive and profitable for the next generation of our family. And Victoria? Victoria can have whatever role in the company matches her actual capabilities and interests, but she cannot have controlling authority over decisions she's not qualified to make. My parents exchanged a long look, communicating in the wordless way that couples develop after 30 years of marriage. We need to talk to Victoria, my mother said finally. Yes, I agreed. We do. But first, we need to cancel the engagement party you've planned for next weekend, and we need to postpone any announcements about transferring company ownership. Luna, my father said quietly, Victoria is going to be devastated. Victoria is going to be angry, I corrected, but she's also going to learn what it feels like to have her future determined by someone else's strategic planning rather than her own efforts. It was time for the golden child to discover that inheritance, like love, is something that has to be earned. Victoria didn't take the news well. I found her in the conservatory the next morning, surrounded by wedding magazines and fabric samples, her laptop open to a Pinterest board titled Sinclair Industries Power Couple Goals that made my stomach turn with its blend of corporate imagery and romantic fantasy. She looked up when I entered, her smile bright and brittle. Luna, perfect timing. I'm trying to decide between champagne roses and blush peonies for the engagement party centerpieces. What do you think says sophisticated business dynasty better? I sat down across from her glass table, noting the irony that she was planning a celebration of inheriting something that had never belonged to her in the first place. Victoria, we need to talk about the company. Oh, good. I was hoping you'd want to discuss your role in the transition, she said, setting down a fabric swatch and giving me her full attention. Marcus and I have been talking about how to make sure you feel included in our new leadership structure. We're thinking you could head up the research and development department, maybe focus on the analytical work you enjoy so much. Research and development, a department that didn't exist at Sinclair Industries, reporting to a CEO who had no idea what research and development actually entailed. Victoria, I said carefully, there isn't going to be a transition, at least, not the kind you're expecting. Her smile faltered slightly. What do you mean? I pulled out the legal documents I had brought with me, copies of Grandmother Catherine's will, the trust agreements, and the official transfer notifications. I mean that Grandmother Catherine left me controlling interest in Sinclair Industries, As of last week, I own 62% of the company. Victoria stared at the documents without touching them, as if they might contain some contagious disease. That's ridiculous. Why would Grandmother Catherine do that? Because I've been running the strategic planning for Sinclair Industries for the past 3 years. Because I have an MBA from Wharton, with a focus on international business development. Because I've increased company profits by 340% with the operational improvements I've implemented. You've been helping with some projects, Victoria said dismissively. That doesn't mean you're qualified to run the entire company. What qualifications do you have to run the company? The question hung in the air between us like a challenge. Victoria's face flushed with anger and embarrassment. I'm the older daughter, she said finally. I've been preparing for this responsibility my entire life. How? By planning charity events and attending social functions? By building relationships, Victoria snapped. By understanding the importance of reputation and community standing. By learning how to represent the Sinclair name with dignity and grace, all of which are valuable skills for a corporate communications director or community relations manager, I said gently, but none of which constitute the strategic thinking necessary to compete in global manufacturing markets. Victoria stood up abruptly, scattering fabric samples across the floor. You can't do this, Luna. You can't just take everything I've worked for. What have you worked for exactly? The question was harsher than I had intended, but it needed to be asked. Victoria had spent her entire life assuming that inheritance was automatic, that being the favored daughter meant being the deserving daughter. I've worked to be the kind of person who could lead this family, she said, her voice rising. I've made connections, built relationships, established credibility in our community. I've been preparing to marry someone who could help expand our business internationally. You've been preparing to marry someone who wants to use your inheritance to start his own consulting firm, I replied, showing her the corporate registration documents for Hamilton Strategic Consulting. Marcus established this company 2 weeks before he proposed to you. Victoria grabbed the documents, scanning them with growing alarm. This doesn't mean anything. Lots of people start consulting firms. People with relevant experience and established client relationships start consulting firms. Marcus has neither. What he has is access to $1 billion corporation through marriage to its presumed heir. You're wrong, Victoria said, but her voice lacked conviction. Marcus loves me. He wouldn't. When did Marcus first express interest in you romantically? I asked gently. Victoria sat back down, her anger deflating into confusion. About 4 months ago. We met at the Whitman charity auction, and he was so charming and interesting. He actually wanted to hear my ideas about business and philanthropy. Did he know who you were before he approached you? Well, yes, but that's normal at those events. Everyone knows everyone. Victoria, did it seem strange to you that a man with international finance experience would be so interested in your ideas about local charity work? I watched as the pieces began falling into place in Victoria's mind. The sudden romance, the quick progression to engagement, Marcus's intense interest in Sinclair Industries' operations and future plans. He asked me a lot of questions about the company, she said slowly, about our profit margins, our client relationships, our expansion plans. I thought he was just being supportive, trying to understand what would become his business too. He was conducting due diligence, I said. Research to determine whether marrying you would provide sufficient return on investment. Victoria was quiet for a long moment, staring at the wedding magazines that suddenly looked like evidence of her own naivety. So what happens now? She asked finally. Now we tell Marcus that the engagement gift he was expecting isn't available, and we figure out what role you actually want to have in Sinclair Industries, based on what you're genuinely interested in and qualified to do. And if I don't want to work for my little sister? The hurt in her voice was real, and I felt a stab of empathy for the woman who had built her entire identity around being the heir apparent to something that had never been hers. Then you don't, I said simply. You can do whatever you want with your life, Victoria, but you can't do it with my company. Victoria looked around the conservatory, at the wedding plans and corporate fantasies that had defined her immediate future just minutes earlier. I hate you, she said quietly. I know, I replied, but that doesn't change who owns the shares. Marcus arrived for dinner that evening wearing his best impression of a concerned fiancé, his handsome face arranged in an expression of thoughtful worry that probably worked well in client meetings, but looked calculated under the crystal chandelier of our formal dining room. He kissed Victoria's cheek with practiced tenderness and shook my father's hand with just the right amount of firm confidence before settling into the chair across from me with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Victoria mentioned there might be some family business to discuss, he said, his tone carefully neutral. I hope I can be helpful in working through whatever concerns have arisen. I studied him while my mother served the first course, noting the details I had missed during our brief introduction the night before. The Rolex was real, but not the latest model, expensive enough to signal success, but not so expensive as to suggest he didn't need Victoria's money. His suit was well-tailored, but showed subtle signs of wear at the cuffs and shoulders. His wedding ring finger bore the faint tan line of a band that had been recently removed. "Marcus," I said conversationally, "tell us about your background in international finance." He brightened at the question, launching into what was clearly a well-rehearsed summary of his professional experience. "I spent 3 years at Whitmore & Associates managing investment portfolios for high-net-worth individuals, focusing primarily on emerging market opportunities and currency hedging strategies. Before that, I was with Goldman Sachs in their wealth management division." "Which division of Goldman Sachs specifically?" I asked. A brief flicker of uncertainty crossed his features. "The Private Client Services Group. I worked primarily with institutional investors looking to diversify their international holdings." I pulled out my phone and opened the LinkedIn profile I had bookmarked earlier. "According to your professional history, you were actually an associate at Goldman Sachs Federal Credit Union, which is a completely different organization that provides banking services to government employees. And Whitmore & Associates is a small wealth management firm in Delaware that primarily handles retirement planning for middle-class families." The silence that followed was profound. Victoria stared at Marcus with growing alarm while my parents exchanged meaningful glances. "There must be some confusion," Marcus said smoothly. "LinkedIn profiles aren't always completely accurate." "There's no confusion," I interrupted, pulling up the additional research I had conducted. "Marcus Hamilton graduated from Rutgers Business School with a 3.2 GPA, worked for 2 years at a regional bank in New Jersey, handling personal loan applications, then spent 3 years at a small wealth management firm, making approximately $65,000 annually before being terminated for undisclosed reasons 18 months ago." Victoria's face had gone completely white. "Terminated?" "According to court records, Whitmore & Associates filed a complaint alleging misappropriation of client funds, though the charges were dropped when Marcus agreed to a financial settlement and non-disclosure agreement. I showed them the court documents I had obtained through public record searches. Marcus's confident facade was beginning to crack, but he was still trying to maintain his composure. "This is clearly some kind of mistake or identity confusion," he said, though his voice had lost its smooth confidence. "Luna, I don't know why you're attacking me personally." "I'm not attacking you," I said calmly. "I'm conducting due diligence on someone who wants to marry into my family and gain access to my company. The same kind of background investigation any corporation would conduct before entering into a business partnership." "Your company!" Marcus's mask slipped completely for just a moment, revealing something cold and calculating underneath. "Victoria told me you were just involved in some research projects. Victoria told you what she believed to be true at the time," I replied. "But circumstances have changed significantly since your engagement was announced." I explained the inheritance situation to Marcus, watching his expression shift from confusion to anger to what looked like genuine panic as he realized his carefully constructed plan was falling apart. "Of course, this doesn't necessarily affect your relationship with Victoria," I continued conversationally. "I'm sure your feelings for her are completely independent of any business considerations." Marcus looked around the table at 4 faces that were now studying him with various degrees of suspicion and disappointment. Victoria was staring at him as if seeing him clearly for the first time. "Victoria," he said, reaching for her hand, "you have to understand that none of this changes how I feel about you. Yes, I may have simplified some aspects of my background, but that's only because I wanted you to see me as worthy of your family's respect." "You lied about your entire career," Victoria said, pulling her hand away from his. "You lied about your education, your experience, your qualifications." "I embellished," Marcus corrected desperately. "Everyone embellishes their resume when they're trying to make a good impression. That doesn't mean my feelings for you aren't genuine." "When did you first learn about Sinclair Industries?" I asked quietly. Marcus hesitated, clearly calculating whether honesty or continued deception would serve him better at this point. "I had heard of the company, obviously," he said finally. "Anyone in business knows about Sinclair Industries." "When did you learn that Victoria was the presumed heir?" Another pause. "I suppose it came up naturally in conversation once we started getting serious." "Before or after you established Hamilton Strategic Consulting?" The question hung in the air like an indictment. Marcus's shoulders slumped slightly as he realized there was no way to spin the timeline in his favor. "Look," he said, abandoning his charm offensive for desperate honesty, "maybe I did see an opportunity to combine our relationship with business prospects." But that doesn't mean I don't care about Victoria. We could still build something together. No, Victoria said quietly, removing her engagement ring and setting it on the table between them. We couldn't. Marcus stared at the ring, then at Victoria, then at the faces around the table that showed no sympathy for his situation. This is a mistake, he said, standing abruptly. Victoria, you're going to regret this. Your family is making a serious error in judgment. The only error in judgment, I said, was trusting someone who built his entire relationship on deception. After Marcus left, we sat in silence for several minutes. Victoria was crying quietly, and my parents looked like they had aged a decade in the span of one dinner conversation. I'm sorry, Victoria said finally, looking directly at me. I should have been more careful. I should have asked more questions. You trusted someone you thought you loved, I replied gently. That's not a character flaw, Victoria. That's being human. But as I watched my sister grieve for the future she had thought she was building, I couldn't help wondering what other secrets our family was hiding, and what other threats to Sinclair Industries might be lurking in places I hadn't thought to look. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. I was in the kitchen making coffee when I heard tires on the gravel driveway, and through the window I saw a sleek black BMW pulling up to our front entrance. A woman in an expensive suit stepped out, mid-50s, silver hair and a perfect chignon, carrying herself with the kind of authority that suggested she was accustomed to being the most important person in any room. Luna, my mother called from the foyer, her voice tight with stress. There's someone here to see you. The woman introduced herself as Margaret Whitmore, senior partner at Whitmore, Chen & Associates, the law firm that had managed grandmother Catherine's estate, and the trust arrangements that had just upended our family's assumptions about inheritance and control. I apologize for arriving unannounced, Margaret said as we settled in my father's study. But, given the circumstances, I felt it was important to discuss some additional aspects of your grandmother's estate planning that weren't included in the initial trust transfer documents. She opened her briefcase and extracted a thick manila folder. Catherine was very specific about the timing of these revelations. She wanted you to have a few days to adjust to your new ownership responsibilities before learning about the broader context of her decisions. My parents exchanged nervous glances. What broader context? My father asked. Margaret opened the folder and began laying out documents across the desk. Richard, Patricia, I need you to understand that Catherine was aware of Sinclair Industries' financial situation in far more detail than either of you realized. The first document was a comprehensive financial audit of Sinclair Industries conducted by an independent accounting firm 6 months before Catherine's death. As I scanned the summary, my blood ran cold. We're hemorrhaging money, I said, looking at the operational losses that had been carefully hidden through creative accounting and deferred payments to suppliers. According to this, we should have been bankrupt 18 months ago. Your parents have been keeping the company afloat through a series of increasingly desperate measures, Margaret explained gently. Short-term loans, delayed payments to vendors, deferred maintenance on equipment, and liquidation of long-term investments. I looked at my parents, who were both staring at the floor as if the Persian rug contained answers to questions they didn't want to face. How long has this been going on? I asked. About 3 years, my father admitted quietly. We started having cash flow problems when Chen Industries undercut our pricing on the Morrison contract. Then Bergman Group launched their new product line and took away 2 of our biggest clients. We thought it was temporary, just a rough patch while the market adjusted. But instead of developing strategies to compete more effectively, you borrowed money to maintain operations, I said, reviewing the loan documents Margaret had provided. How much do we owe? Approximately $47 million in short-term debt, Margaret replied, with another $23 million in deferred obligations to suppliers and contractors. The room felt like it was spinning. $70 million in debt that I had inherited along with my controlling interest in a company I had thought was profitable and stable. Why didn't you tell me? I asked my parents. All this time I've been developing growth strategies, and you never mentioned that we were on the verge of bankruptcy? We didn't want to burden you with problems that weren't your responsibility, my mother said defensively. And we thought Victoria would be taking over the company anyway, so you were planning to give Victoria a bankrupt corporation as a wedding gift, I finished. Did Marcus know about the financial situation? That's where the situation becomes more concerning, Margaret said, pulling out another set of documents. Based on the investigation Catherine commissioned before her death, Marcus Hamilton approached Victoria after conducting extensive research into Sinclair Industries' financial vulnerabilities. She showed us corporate records and financial data that painted a disturbing picture. Marcus hadn't just been targeting Victoria as the heir to a successful company. He had been specifically targeting a company in financial distress, with a plan to acquire control and then sell assets to pay off debts while keeping the profits for himself. Hamilton Strategic Consulting was established as a debt restructuring and asset liquidation firm, Margaret explained. Marcus's plan appears to have been to marry Victoria, gain control of the company, then systematically dismantle Sinclair Industries and sell the pieces to competitors. He was going to destroy us, Victoria said quietly from the doorway. We turned to see her standing there in her robe, looking like she hadn't slept. He wasn't trying to build a business with me. He was planning to cannibalize our family's company. Margaret nodded grimly. Catherine suspected as much, which is why she restructured the ownership to ensure that someone with both business expertise and genuine commitment to the family legacy would have control when the crisis reached its peak. I stared at the financial documents, trying to process the magnitude of what I had inherited. A company drowning in debt, parents who had been lying about our financial situation for years, and a sister who had nearly married someone planning to destroy everything our family had built. What options do we have? I asked. Honestly, very limited, Margaret replied. The debt service alone requires about $400,000 per month. Current revenues barely cover operational expenses. Without significant operational improvements or major new contracts, bankruptcy is inevitable within 6 to 8 months. What about the growth strategies I've been developing? The international expansion plans, the supply chain optimization? Would take 18 to 24 months to generate sufficient revenue to address the debt crisis, Margaret said. You don't have that kind of time. The weight of the situation settled over me like a suffocating blanket. I had spent years developing strategic plans for a company I thought was successful, only to discover that I had inherited a financial disaster that required immediate solutions rather than long-term growth strategies. There is one possibility Catherine wanted me to discuss with you, Margaret said, pulling out a final document. She established a separate trust fund containing approximately $50 million in liquid assets. The money can only be used to pay down Sinclair Industries' debt, and only if you agree to specific conditions. What conditions? Complete operational restructuring under your direct leadership, with no involvement from other family members in strategic decision-making. Essentially, Catherine was offering you the resources to save the company, but only if you were willing to take complete responsibility for its future. I looked around the room at my parents, who had nearly destroyed the family business through a combination of poor decision-making and willful denial, and at Victoria, who had almost married someone planning to finish the job they had started. I'll take it, I said. After all, it wasn't just about saving a company anymore. It was about proving that the overlooked daughter could succeed where the golden child and her parents had failed. I spent the weekend in my makeshift war room, the conservatory where Victoria had been planning her wedding just days earlier, surrounded by financial statements, operational reports, and strategic analysis documents that painted a picture of a company in crisis, but not yet beyond salvation. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was planning to save Sinclair Industries from the same table where my sister had been planning to hand it over to someone who wanted to destroy it. Monday morning arrived with the first battle of what I knew would be a long campaign. I had scheduled an emergency board meeting for 9 a.m., though board meeting was something of an overstatement for a family-owned company whose board consisted of my parents, Victoria, myself, and 3 family friends who had been appointed to provide the appearance of independent oversight without the reality of independent judgment. "This is highly irregular," said Harold Morrison, my father's golf partner and the board's supposed financial expert, as I distributed copies of the comprehensive audit report. "Luna, it's not appropriate for you to call emergency meetings without consulting with your father first. Actually, Harold, as the majority shareholder, it's entirely appropriate for me to call any meetings I deem necessary," I replied calmly. "And given the financial situation we're facing, I'd say this qualifies as an emergency." I spent the next hour walking the board through the reality of our situation. $70 million in debt, revenue declining by 15% year over year, key clients defecting to competitors, equipment and facilities deteriorating due to deferred maintenance, a workforce that hadn't received a meaningful raise in 3 years and was beginning to explore opportunities with other companies. "The choices are simple," I concluded. "We implement immediate operational restructuring under my leadership, or we file for bankruptcy within 6 months. "Luna," said Eleanor Whitman, my mother's childhood friend and the board's token female member, "don't you think this is all rather dramatic? Surely there are intermediate solutions that don't require such drastic changes in leadership." "What intermediate solutions would you suggest, Eleanor?" She glanced at my father for guidance before responding. "Well, perhaps we could bring in outside consultants to help develop a recovery plan." "We can't afford outside consultants," I said bluntly. We can barely afford to pay our current employees. Or maybe we could consider a partnership with another company, suggested Thomas Crawford, the board's legal advisor. Someone with resources who could help us through this difficult period. You mean like Marcus Hamilton? I asked, because that was exactly his plan, to position himself as our financial savior while systematically looting our assets. The room fell silent as the board members absorbed the implications of what I was saying. I'm not interested in partnerships or consultants or incremental changes, I continued. I'm interested in aggressive operational restructuring that will position us to compete effectively in a global market. That means international expansion, supply chain optimization, technological upgrades, and strategic acquisitions of smaller competitors. Those strategies require significant capital investment, my father pointed out. Capital we don't have. Actually, we do have it, I said, pulling out the documents Margaret Whitmore had provided about Grandmother Catherine's separate trust fund. But accessing that capital requires unanimous board approval for my appointment as CEO with full operational authority. I watched their faces as they processed what I was proposing. Not just ownership control, but complete management authority over every aspect of Sinclair Industries operations. Luna, my mother said carefully, you're talking about taking over the company entirely. Don't you think you should start with a smaller role? Maybe work your way up to executive leadership? We don't have time for gradual transitions, I replied. Every month we delay implementing these changes costs us approximately $400,000 in additional debt service and operational losses. Victoria, who had been silent throughout the meeting, finally spoke up. What role would the rest of us have in the company under your leadership? Whatever roles match your actual qualifications and interests, I said honestly. Victoria, you've always been good at public relations and community engagement. We need someone to rebuild our reputation and manage client relationships. Mom, your background in charitable work could be valuable for developing corporate social responsibility programs that appeal to environmentally conscious clients. And me? My father asked quietly. You would remain chairman of the board with advisory responsibilities, but operational decisions would be mine to make. Harold Morrison cleared his throat. Luna, this is a family business that has been run by Sinclair men for 3 generations. Don't you think there's value in maintaining traditional leadership structures? Harold, I interrupted. Traditional leadership structures have brought us to the brink of bankruptcy. Traditional decision-making has cost us $70 million and our competitive position in the market. I'm not interested in preserving traditions that don't work. The vote, when it finally came, was closer than I had expected. My mother and Victoria voted in favor of my appointment, recognizing that bankruptcy was the only alternative. My father and Harold Morrison voted against, clinging to the old power structures even as they collapsed around them. Eleanor Whitman and Thomas Crawford abstained, unwilling to take responsibility for either supporting change or maintaining the status quo. But with my own shares plus Victoria's support, I had the majority control needed to implement my restructuring plan. Motion carried, I announced, feeling a surge of satisfaction as I officially became CEO of Sinclair Industries. Our first priority is accessing Grandmother Catherine's emergency fund to address our immediate debt obligations. Our second priority is implementing the operational improvements I've been developing for the past 3 years. As the board members filed out of the conservatory, Victoria lingered behind. Luna, she said quietly, I'm sorry for everything that happened with Marcus, and I'm sorry for assuming that inheriting the company was my right, rather than something that had to be earned. Victoria, you don't need to apologize for being the favorite daughter, I replied. But you do need to understand that being liked isn't the same as being qualified. I know that now, she said, and I want to help. I want to learn how to actually contribute to the company instead of just assuming I deserve to lead it. Looking at my sister, no longer the perfect golden child, but a woman genuinely committed to earning her place in our family business, I felt the first stirring of hope that we might actually be able to save Sinclair Industries. Good, I said, because what we're about to attempt is going to require everyone working at their absolute best. The corporate coup was complete. Now came the hard part, proving that the overlooked daughter could actually deliver on her promises to save the family legacy. The safe deposit box at First National Bank contained more than just money. It contained the story of a woman who had been planning for this moment far longer than any of us had realized. Margaret Whitmore and I sat in the bank's private viewing room as I opened the metal box that Grandmother Catherine had left specifically for me, accessible only after I had taken control of Sinclair Industries. Inside, along with the financial documents that would unlock the $50 million emergency fund, was a letter written in Catherine's careful handwriting and dated just 3 months before her death. My dearest Luna, If you are reading this letter, it means that the crisis I have been anticipating has finally come to pass, and you have assumed control of Sinclair Industries, under circumstances far more difficult than you deserve to inherit. I want you to understand that every decision I made regarding the company's ownership was based on careful observation of your capabilities and your family's limitations. Your parents are good people who lack the strategic thinking necessary to compete in a changing business environment. Victoria is a lovely young woman who has been ill-served by a lifetime of unearned praise that prevented her from developing real skills. You, however, have spent years proving that you possess not only the analytical abilities to understand complex business challenges, but the innovative thinking to develop solutions that others cannot see. More importantly, you have the character to make difficult decisions based on long-term sustainability, rather than short-term comfort. The $50 million I have set aside for Sinclair Industries represents half of my personal fortune, accumulated over 60 years of careful investment and strategic planning. The other half has been donated to educational institutions and charitable organizations, because I believe that resources should be used to create opportunities for others, not simply to perpetuate wealth within families. But this money comes with conditions that go beyond the legal requirements Margaret has explained to you. I need you to understand what you are truly inheriting, not just a company in crisis, but a legacy of women who refuse to accept limitations imposed by other people's expectations. Your great-grandmother Eleanor started Sinclair Industries with $500 and a determination to prove that a woman could build something lasting in a world that told her she was only capable of supporting other people's ambitions. I expanded the company by refusing to accept that good enough was actually good enough, by pushing for innovation and excellence when our competitors were content with mediocrity. Now it falls to you to ensure that our family's legacy continues. But I want you to understand that legacy is not about preserving the past. It is about having the courage to create the future. I paused in my reading, feeling the weight of 3 generations of expectations settling on my shoulders. The company you have inherited is in crisis because your parents made the same mistake that destroys most family businesses. They assumed that ownership and management were the same thing, that being born into a family automatically qualified someone to lead that family's enterprise. But you have earned your position through competence, not birthright. You have developed expertise through study and analysis, not assumption and tradition. You have proven that you can see what others miss and solve problems that others cannot even identify. The restructuring plan you developed last year. Yes, I have been reviewing your strategic analyses for the past 3 years through Margaret's office, is precisely the kind of innovative thinking Sinclair Industries needs to survive and thrive in a competitive global market. Your insights about international expansion, supply chain optimization, and technological integration are more sophisticated than strategies being developed by consultants at firms 10 times our size. But Luna, I need you to understand that saving the company is only the beginning of what I am asking you to accomplish. I want you to build something that transcends the limitations that have constrained previous generations of our family. I want you to prove that a business can be both profitable and ethical, that strategic thinking can be both innovative and responsible, that leadership can be both decisive and compassionate. Most importantly, I want you to ensure that when your own time comes to pass on this legacy, you will leave behind opportunities for future generations to build something even greater than what you inherited. The money in this trust fund will solve your immediate crisis, but what you do with the company after that crisis is resolved will determine whether our family's legacy continues or ends with you. I have complete confidence in your abilities, Luna. I have watched you develop into exactly the kind of strategic thinker and ethical leader that Sinclair Industries needs, but I also know that what you are about to attempt will test every capability you possess, and some that you have not yet discovered. Remember that true leadership is not about proving that you are better than the people who underestimated you. True leadership is about creating conditions where everyone can perform at their highest potential. Your parents and Victoria are not your enemies. They are family members who have made mistakes based on limited understanding and poor judgment. Give them opportunities to contribute meaningfully to the company's future, but do not compromise your strategic vision to accommodate their comfort. Build alliances with people who share your commitment to excellence, but do not trust anyone who tells you that your goals are too ambitious or your standards are too high. And never, ever accept anyone else's definition of what you are capable of achieving. All my love and absolute confidence. Grandmother Catherine. P.S. Check the small compartment at the back of the safe deposit box. I left you something that belonged to your great-grandmother Eleanor, something she would have wanted you to have as you begin this journey. I reached into the back of the box and found a small velvet jewelry case. Inside was a simple gold pendant engraved with the words, "She believed she could, so she did," and a note in different handwriting. "For my granddaughter Catherine, who will build something lasting. May she pass this on to someone equally determined to create, rather than merely inherit." Margaret Whitmore was watching me with a gentle smile. "Catherine spent months writing that letter," she said. "She wanted to ensure that you understood not just what you were inheriting, but why she believed you were the right person to inherit it." I fastened the pendant around my neck, feeling the weight of 3 generations of women who had refused to accept other people's limitations on their capabilities. "What now?" I asked. "Now you prove her right," Margaret replied. "You save the company, build the future she envisioned, and create a legacy worthy of the trust she placed in you." As we left the bank with the documents that would transfer $50 million to Sinclair Industries accounts, I realized that Grandmother Catherine had given me something far more valuable than money. She had given me the understanding that what I was about to accomplish would not just save a business, it would honor the courage and determination of every woman who had refused to settle for what others thought she deserved. The quarterly board meeting that would determine Sinclair Industries' future was scheduled for 2 p.m. on a crisp October afternoon in the mahogany-paneled conference room that had hosted 3 generations of corporate decisions. But this time, the stakes were different. This time, the survival of everything our family had built depended on my ability to convince a room full of skeptics that the overlooked daughter had actually become the company's salvation. I arrived early to set up my presentation, arranging financial documents and strategic projections across the polished table, where my grandfather had once negotiated deals that established our company's reputation for innovation and integrity. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was fighting to restore those same qualities that had been slowly eroded by years of short-term thinking and risk-averse management. The board members arrived in order of their comfort with change. Victoria came first, having spent the past month learning everything she could about corporate communications and client relationship management. My mother followed, carrying herself with the dignity of someone who had finally accepted that supporting her daughter's leadership was more important than maintaining traditional family hierarchies. Harold Morrison and Thomas Crawford arrived together, their expressions suggesting they were hoping this would be the meeting where I admitted defeat and agreed to more reasonable solutions. My father came last, looking like a man who was still adjusting to the reality that his younger daughter had become his boss. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, standing at the head of the table, "I want to show you what we've accomplished in the past 3 months." I pulled up the first slide of my presentation, showing Sinclair Industries' financial position as of the day I became CEO versus our current status. When I took control of the company in July, we had $70 million in debt and were hemorrhaging approximately $400,000 per month in operational losses. Today, we have reduced our debt to $23 million and achieved positive cash flow for the first time in 18 months. Harold Morrison leaned forward, his expression skeptical. "How exactly did you accomplish that?" "Through the systematic implementation of the operational improvements I've been developing for the past 3 years," I replied, advancing to the next slide. "We renegotiated supplier contracts to reduce material costs by 18%. We eliminated redundant administrative positions while investing in training for our production staff. We upgraded our manufacturing equipment using funds from Grandmother Catherine's emergency trust, which increased our efficiency by 32%. I showed them the production numbers, the cost savings, and most importantly, the new contracts we had secured based on our improved capabilities and competitive pricing. The Morrison Industries contract that we lost to Chen Corporation 3 years ago, we won it back last month with a proposal that underbid them by 12%, while maintaining higher profit margins than we had when we originally held that contract." Thomas Crawford was reviewing the financial statements with obvious surprise. "These numbers are impressive, Luna, but can this growth rate be sustained?" "Not just sustained," I said, pulling up the strategic plan I had finalized the night before. "Accelerated. We're ready to move into the international expansion phase of our restructuring." For the next 30 minutes, I walked them through the most ambitious business plan Sinclair Industries had ever considered. Strategic partnerships with manufacturing firms in Southeast Asia, acquisition of 2 smaller competitors who possessed technologies that complemented our capabilities, development of sustainable manufacturing processes that would position us ahead of environmental regulations that would reshape our industry within 5 years. The total investment required is $47 million, I concluded, which we can finance through a combination of our improved cash flow, strategic asset sales, and a targeted loan package that I've already secured preliminary approval for from 3 different banks. $47 million. my father repeated slowly. Luna, that's an enormous risk for a company that was nearly bankrupt just 6 months ago. It's an enormous opportunity, I corrected. Dad, the choice isn't between taking risks and playing it safe. The choice is between taking calculated risks that position us for long-term success and maintaining the status quo that was slowly destroying us. Victoria raised her hand tentatively. What happens if some of these strategies don't work as projected? Then we adjust and adapt, I said honestly. Victoria, business strategy isn't about predicting the future perfectly. It's about building capabilities that allow you to respond effectively to whatever challenges and opportunities emerge. I showed them the contingency plans I had developed for various scenarios: market downturns, increased competition, supply chain disruptions, changes in regulatory requirements. For every potential obstacle, I had identified specific responses that would maintain our competitive position. The plan you're proposing, Eleanor Whitman said slowly, would make Sinclair Industries one of the largest manufacturing companies in the region within 5 years. One of the largest and most innovative, I agreed. Eleanor, we're not just trying to get back to where we were before the crisis. We're positioning ourselves to dominate markets that our competitors don't even know exist yet. Harold Morrison was still studying the financial projections with the expression of someone trying to find flaws in logic that was becoming uncomfortably convincing. Luna, he said finally, this is far more aggressive than anything your father ever attempted. What makes you confident that you can execute strategies of this complexity? 3 years of preparation, I replied simply. Harold, I didn't develop this plan in response to our crisis. I developed it in anticipation of the opportunities that would emerge when we had the resources and management structure to pursue them. I pulled up the final slide of my presentation, a timeline showing how each element of our expansion would build on previous successes, creating a sustainable growth trajectory that would establish Sinclair Industries as an industry leader, rather than just a family business trying to survive. The vote today isn't just about approving a business plan, I said, looking around the table at 6 people who held the future of our family's legacy in their hands. It's about deciding what kind of company we want to be and what kind of legacy we want to leave for the next generation. The silence that followed was long and heavy with the weight of decision. All in favor of approving Luna's expansion plan? My father asked finally. 6 hands went up. Unanimous approval. As the board members filed out of the conference room, discussing implementation timelines and resource allocation, I remained at the table looking out the window at the city where 3 generations of Sinclair women had built something lasting. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. But today, I had proven that the overlooked daughter was ready to surpass everything her predecessors had achieved. 2 years later, I stood on the balcony of the 42nd floor of Sinclair Tower, the building we had purchased and renovated as our new headquarters, looking out at a city skyline that now included our company's name among the most prominent architectural landmarks. The expansion plan that had seemed impossibly ambitious to the board just 24 months earlier had exceeded every projection I had made. Sinclair Industries had become the 3rd largest manufacturing company in the region, with operations in 12 countries and partnerships that had transformed us from a struggling family business into a global corporation respected for both innovation and ethical practices. The $47 million investment had generated over $200 million in new revenue, and our workforce had grown from 340 employees to nearly 1,500. But the numbers, impressive as they were, weren't what gave me the deepest satisfaction as I prepared for the board meeting that would finalize our plans for the next phase of growth. The real victory was seeing Victoria walk into the conference room, carrying herself with the confidence of someone who had earned her place through competence rather than inheritance. As our Director of Global Communications and Community Relations, she had built corporate partnerships and client relationships that had been instrumental in our international expansion. The woman who had once planned charity luncheons was now negotiating multi-million-dollar contracts with manufacturing firms in Southeast Asia. The Jakarta partnership is finalized, she announced, setting down a thick folder of signed agreements. Production begins next quarter, and their projected output will meet 60% of our Southeast Asian market demand. My mother entered next, having just returned from a conference on sustainable manufacturing practices where she had presented our environmental initiatives to industry leaders. Her background in charitable work had translated beautifully into corporate social responsibility, and her programs had positioned Sinclair Industries as a leader in ethical business practices. The carbon neutrality certification is official, she said, holding up a document that represented 2 years of effort to transform our manufacturing processes. We're the first company in our industry to achieve full environmental compliance ahead of the 2027 regulations. Even my father, who had struggled most with the transition to my leadership, had found a role that utilized his decades of relationship building and industry knowledge. As chairman emeritus, he had become our most effective advocate with regulatory agencies and industry associations. The Commerce Department is recommending Sinclair Industries for the National Manufacturing Excellence Award, he said, pride evident in his voice as he handed me the official notification. Luna, they specifically cited your innovative approach to international partnerships and sustainable development. But the most satisfying moment came when Harold Morrison, the board member who had been most resistant to my leadership, stood up to address the assembled group. I owe everyone in this room an apology, he said, his voice carrying the humility of someone who had been fundamentally wrong about something important. 2 years ago, I thought Luna's plans were too ambitious, too risky, too different from traditional business practices. I was protecting what I thought was prudent management, but I was actually defending mediocrity. He turned to face me directly. Luna, you haven't just saved this company. You've transformed it into something that exceeds what any of us thought was possible. You've proven that strategic thinking and ethical leadership aren't just compatible, they're essential for long-term success. As the meeting concluded with unanimous approval for our next expansion phase, a $100 million investment in advanced manufacturing technologies and renewable energy systems, I reflected on the journey that had brought us to this moment. Marcus Hamilton, whose scheme to marry Victoria and liquidate our assets had triggered the crisis that revealed my inheritance, was serving a federal sentence for investment fraud. His attempt to destroy our family's legacy had inadvertently created the circumstances that allowed me to strengthen it beyond anything previous generations had achieved. The debt that had nearly destroyed us was not only eliminated, but had been replaced by a cash reserve of over $80 million and credit facilities that reflected our position as one of the most financially stable companies in our industry. The strategic partnerships I had developed had not only increased our market share, but had established Sinclair Industries as a preferred collaborator for companies seeking innovative solutions to complex manufacturing challenges. Most importantly, the family that had been fractured by secrets, favoritism, and misplaced priorities had been rebuilt around shared commitment to excellence rather than inherited assumptions about who deserved what. Luna, Victoria said as we walked together toward the elevator after the meeting, I want you to know that I understand now why Grandmother Catherine chose you to lead the company. It wasn't just about business expertise. It was about having the courage to make difficult decisions that serve long-term success, rather than short-term comfort. Victoria, you've earned your position here through your own contributions, I replied. What Grandmother Catherine gave me was an opportunity. What you've given yourself is the skills to make the most of your opportunities. As I sat in my office that evening, reviewing the strategic plans that would guide Sinclair Industries through its next phase of growth, I thought about the letter Grandmother Catherine had left me, and her challenge to build something that transcended the limitations that had constrained previous generations. The company I was leading was profitable and ethical, innovative and responsible. We had proven that strategic thinking could create sustainable competitive advantages, that leadership could be both decisive and compassionate, that business success could be measured not just in financial returns, but in positive impact on employees, communities, and environmental sustainability. But perhaps the most important lesson I had learned was that true justice isn't about proving that people who underestimated you were wrong. True justice is about creating opportunities for everyone to discover what they're actually capable of achieving when they're held to high standards and given meaningful responsibilities. The overlooked daughter had become the CEO who saved the family legacy. But more than that, she had become the leader who proved that the best revenge is not just success, it's creating conditions where everyone around you has the opportunity to succeed as well. I fastened Grandmother Catherine's pendant around my neck and began reviewing the proposals for our next board meeting. There was still work to do, still opportunities to pursue, still legacies to build. After all, justice served isn't just about settling old scores. It's about ensuring that the future is built on merit rather than assumptions, on capabilities rather than inheritance, on what people can achieve rather than what others think they deserve.